Hey guys, and welcome back to the 5th episode of my Historic NASA Missions KSP series. This mission is Gemini 7/Gemini 6A, the first manned spaceflight rendezvous in world history. This is one of the ones that we actually beat the Russians to. You might be wondering, why is it Gemini 7/Gemini 6A? Well, the original Gemini 6 mission was slated to get into orbit and rendezvous with an Agena target vehicle. However, when they went to launch that target vehicle, it exploded on the launch pad, so they had to scrap the Gemini 6 mission originally. So they went ahead and went with Gemini 7, which was all along supposed to be just a long-duration space flight to test the effects on the human body and even on the spacecraft of spending days upon days in space in anticipation of going to the moon and back with the Apollo program. So they sent up Gemini 7, and that was basically just sitting there in orbit. And they said, we're going to send up Gemini 6 again. And they wanted to rendezvous Gemini 6 with Gemini 7, because that objective of getting down rendezvous and getting down the procedures and getting the astronauts to practice was just so important. So they went to launch Gemini 6A, and the engine on the Titan II launch vehicle failed on launch. It ignited and then it just stopped. So the big problem with that was that they did not want, it was really dangerous for the vehicle to lift up even an inch from the launch pad and then fall back down upon itself because of there were structural problems and all that fuel. So the astronauts were really supposed to eject if they had gotten any separation from the launch pad whatsoever, to keep them from basically exploding, probably. But the astronauts didn't detect any motion from the spacecraft when the engines actually ignited. So they made the call to not eject, because it was actually pretty dangerous to eject too. The acceleration was so high that they underwent spinal compression, and they could have gotten whiplash and all sorts of high G damage. So 3 days later, they actually finally launched Gemini 6, or really Gemini 6A at this point, and Gemini 7 could actually see the orbit, or see them from orbit, when they actually launched from Florida. And Gemini 6A stayed in a lower orbit once they got up into orbit, so they could catch up with Gemini 7, which was a little bit further ahead. So they ended up starting the rendezvous on their on Gemini 6's fourth orbit around the Earth. This was actually on Gemini 7's 11th day in space. So they were in it for the long haul, but Gemini 6A was really only in it for the rendezvous. So what you see here is that I'm getting the I kind of fast forwarded a little bit, but I got the spacecraft into a circular orbit. This isn't entirely accurate, because I'm more here going for the mission profile than the hardcore details of the mission, because you could see in the beginning I had those kind of asparagus boosters, because the original Titan II launch vehicle recreation that I made for the last video just could not make this 310-kilometer orbit. No matter how I adjusted the gravity turn or what, it just did not have the delta V to get up there. So I ended on those boosters. Also, with all these Gemini missions, they weren't in a 0-degree inclination orbit. They had, I think, something like a 30 to 50-degree inclination, and that had to do, I think, mostly with keeping in range of all the communications and radio stations around the Earth that they had set up for this mission. And then finally, what you see here, I'm doing this inclination and all these adjustment burns with the second stage of the launch vehicle. That's not really what they did. They separated the launch vehicle, I believe, upon circularization, and then they just used the forward thrusters on the capsule, the actual spacecraft itself, to do all of these orbital maneuvers. So you can see that I'm in this lower orbit. I'm about to catch up with Gemini 7 there, because I'm on that lower orbit. So I'm doing a burn there to match up the orbit, and you can see that gets pretty darn close for that. I guess you would call it the intersection point of the two orbits. So that's pretty ideal. I was really thankful that I actually got to not be like 50 kilometers apart on that closest approach. But in real life, they rendezvoused pretty similarly to how I'm doing it here. They basically circularized, and then after that, they waited until they were a little bit closer. They changed their inclination. They did an inclination burn to match up inclination, because you want to be obviously on the same inclination as your target spacecraft. And then they did, I think, 1 or 2 more burns after that. Definitely at least one. They did another burn like I did there to kind of intersect or get an angle on, I guess. I'm kind of struggling for words here. Intersect with the target spacecraft. And then finally, they did another burn at about the point that I am here to match up orbits. So they got in a fairly close orbit, and they kind of just slowly approached, which is basically what you do in KSP. It's not like the physics are that different. You want to, if something's the best thing to do in real life, it's usually the best thing to do in KSP too. So that's why you do a gravity turn. That's why you do rendezvous this way. Like I said in one of my earlier videos, the Falcon 9, I want to say, heavy lift vehicle, actually more or less has asparagus staging, even though it only has 2 boosters versus like 4, 6, or 8 boosters. So a lot of this stuff has grounding in real life. So I kind of have this little bit of a problem there. I use Fraps to record, and it just kind of crapped out on me, and that even desynced the audio a little bit, but I fixed it later on. But this is what I'm doing here, is just zeroing out my velocity because I'm getting pretty close. The actual spacecraft had only 2 rearward facing thrusters to provide forward thrust, but here I've got probably, I want to say, like 24 of them, just because I'm using RCS, and it's a pretty heavy vehicle because I've got that lander cam plus the adapter piece to kind of make it shaped right, plus all those, again, the heavy-ass Separatrons. So I'm approaching here, kind of speeding all this stuff up. Obviously, I may be a master at KSP, but I can't really rendezvous and do maneuvers this quickly. But you can kind of see that it's getting closer and closer and closer. And I'm in chase view. It's kind of weird to see it in chase view because it keeps that constant orientation around the spacecraft. But there we go, getting a little bit closer, coming in on about 100 meters away. And initially, when Gemini 6 saw Gemini 7, they thought that it might be the one of the brightest stars in the sky, or perhaps I think even the brightest star in the sky, which is Sirius. But eventually, it got closer and closer and closer, and they found out that it was indeed Gemini 7. It was their target. So I'm getting close there. In reality, they stayed. It's called station keeping, to stay in a given orbit, in basically a given location in a rotational frame. They stayed station keeping with Gemini 7 for about 270 minutes, and at one point they went for 20 minutes without having to make any burns. So that was how well they zeroed out their velocity in relation to each other, because once they got close, Gemini 7, they had to maneuver as well. So at one point they were only about less than a meter away from each other. So that's how precise these guys were. I mean, obviously they were test pilots, so they had pretty good stick skills, so to speak, but they got within 1 foot of each other, and were able to zero out that velocity enough that being within 1 foot of each other wasn't even dangerous at all. I don't think that I quite get to within 1 foot. I think this is more or less the closest that I get here. But if you look up on the internet, I haven't included them in this video, but look up on the internet, there's some pretty cool pictures that each spacecraft took at the other spacecraft. So you can see like Gemini, I think it was 6, that had like the wires hanging out from the stage separation, and it's kind of striking how if you look at it from the with the backdrop of the Earth and everything, that these 2 spacecraft are kind of both so alone in the universe, because mankind's below all of them, and yet they're finding each other in space. I think it's kind of cool how striking that is. So what I'm doing here is just trying to rotate around each spacecraft so that the little lander can window is facing each other on each one, so that the Kerbal knots can kind of wink and wave at each other. In real life, they obviously did take pictures out of the spacecraft, inspected each other's spacecraft. They were in constant radio communication with each other, so that they you don't want to say, oh, I'm burning aft and then end up smashing into their spacecraft, because that would be pretty dangerous. So they were in constant radio communication, and you can kind of see as we kind of slowly come forward in our orbit that we're coming up on the day-night termination point of the planet Kerbin. In reality, this is just about where they were in real life when they separated, because and you can see that I'm burning away there. They did burn away in real life. They did a separation burn to get some distance and some outward velocity from each other, so that they weren't at risk of colliding during the night, because by this time in the Gemini program, they had both of the astronauts sleep at the same time, so that one of the astronauts wasn't, say, on the radio to mission control and the other one couldn't sleep because they were having real fatigue problems. And also in this mission, they tested out spacesuits that were a little bit easier to remove than the previous spacesuits, but NASA officials still told them that you had to have at least one astronaut in the capsule has to have the spacesuit on at once. So they tried switching off, and these new spacesuits were just so uncomfortable that neither astronaut really wanted to be the one that had to wear them. So they ended up convincing the bigwigs at NASA to let both of them take off their spacesuits. So they finally gave in and said, okay, fine. So you can see that was my solid booster retrograde burn, which again doesn't really do anything because I don't have enough separatrons, but I'm not going to put on 3 tons in separatrons just to get that where I want it to be. So I ended up using it's fast forwarding here, so I already got past that point, but I ended up using RCS fuel to do my retrograde burn, and you can see that that's bringing down my apoapsis and my periapsis. And I decided to on this one to be a little bit more accurate with how I landed. So I'm trying to land in the ocean again to the east of Kerbal Space Center, and I realized that I tried that before, and I ended up on that little peninsula that you can kind of see. You can still see actually the quote-unquote debris from that, but I wanted to actually do it this time, and I also actually wanted to learn from my mistakes and get that very top part that has in real life it had some of the retrograde thrusters and the rendezvous system in there. I wanted to get that parachute that I included working, because I thought it was pretty cool to have that stage. You can see kind of the partial solar eclipse there. It's weird because I think that I'm actually pretty far into this save file, because I've done so many retries at flights and so on. So I don't think this is that solar eclipse that happens as soon as you start a new game. I think it's another one. So you can see there's KSC flying below me. A cool fact is that right before they went to sleep and separated their spacecraft, Wally Schirra, who was one of the astronauts that was in Gemini 6, he was actually the one that had the decision to, there you can see the separation. He's actually the one that had the decision to pull that abort handle. He radioed over to 7, and he said that he saw another spacecraft besides those two, obviously, on a polar orbit, and that it had a a main command module and 8 tiny other command modules, and the pilot of the command module was wearing a red suit, and then he started he had brought up a harmonica with him, so he started playing Jingle Bells on his harmonica. So that's actually the Smithsonian says the first instance of anybody playing an instrument in space. So I thought that was kind of cool. Wally Schirra kind of had a cool sense of humor. So you can see here, 6A basically went up, did 4 orbits, rendezvoused with 7, and then it deorbited. 7 happened to stay up for another 3 days, and one of the astronauts, I'm forgetting who right now, who went up on Gemini 5, he said that was another pretty long duration flight, not as long as the duration of Gemini 7. But he said, you know, it gets super boring up there, bring up some books. So one of them I really brought up a Mark Twain book, and I'm not sure what the other one brought up. But it was that flight was Jim Lovell and Frank Borman. So Jim Lovell was the astronaut that happened to be on the failed Apollo 13 mission. And I believe he was the one that was reading the Mark Twain book. I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that. This is kind of just I researched this stuff, but I'm kind of just saying some of this stuff from memory. So there you got splashdown of the 6A capsule. So then I went back and took control of 7. And then if my computer would not lag out on me. So I decided to kind of keep them in space for a little while. This is really only, if you look up at the mission elapsed time up in the corner, this is really only a few hours, but did a few more orbits. You can see all of that freaking space debris. This is not really, I mean, I'm not sure, but I doubt it's representative of how much space debris was actually in space at this point in time. I mean, they did have TV satellites and all that, and there was obviously space debris up there from Russian and American launches, but I've got so much up there because of mostly it was, I believe, Friendship 7 debris and Explorer 1 debris. Not so much Gemini debris. You can see Explorer 1 is on that kind of offset orbit from Gemini 7 there. So we've got our little maneuver, our fire of the retro thrusters, and it just, in real life, this took forever to get the RCS to actually bring down my periapsis enough. So I'm kind of sparing you guys that. They were worried that when, not so much Gemini 6A, because like I said, that was up for a short amount of time, but they were worried that when Gemini 7 came down to Earth, because they had been up in space for so long, they were worried, I'm not sure specifically why, it must have been something to do with our understanding of the human body to that point, which was obviously not quite correct, but they were worried that once, not really on reentry, but once they actually splashed down and everything, that their hearts would stop. So they were kind of worried about that. It kind of ends up in the history notes on the idea that they would sink through 20 feet of moon dust when they landed on the moon, and that didn't happen either. But that was one of the concerns. It kind of almost reminds me of the sorts of ideas that people had of what happened when you were exposed to radiation back before we actually knew the real and honestly horrible effects of radiation on the human body. So we're gonna have separation of the top part of the capsule in a second. There it goes. And I was actually kind of terrified, not during this obviously, because I had already done the re-entry. And thunk, there goes the stack decoupler. Terrified that the RCS was gonna snap off once the parachute's actually fully deployed, because I think I did that on Gemini 4. But I think the fact that I used about a quarter, I want to say, of my RCS fuel made sure that it didn't snap off. Because I was afraid that it was gonna, that because the parachutes were attached to that adapter piece there, that's what was gonna survive the snap off. Because you can see it does snap off, but I was really worried that the lander cannon was going to go with it. So there you have it. That is my rendition / recreation of Gemini 7 and Gemini 6A. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. This is kind of almost a bridge video. The one that I'm really looking forward to, that I've actually already started to work on as I'm rendering this video is Gemini 8, which featured Neil Armstrong, future American hero, and actually did end up rendezvousing with its Agena target vehicle. So that video is going to be coming up hopefully a little bit sooner. I tried to wait for a new mic that I was getting in the mail to come before doing this one, and the mic ended up horrible, so this is on my old mic. Hopefully I'll be getting a new mic. So there's our brave heroes, Bill and Jeb, waiting to be picked up by the actual Navy this time instead of landing over there in foreign territory on land. So if you like this video, feel free to hit like. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to comment. If you want to see the next video, feel free to hit subscribe. This is OnSoul3 signing off.